Begin. The wind, a constant companion, whispered across Alera's claim. It carried the scent of dry earth and the promise of endless space. Her home, a humble sod house, rose from the prairie like a part of the land itself. Its thick walls, cut from the very soil she farmed, blended perfectly with the dusty landscape. To a stranger passing by, it might look like just another bump on the wide, flat horizon. Alera was a woman carved from the same tough stuff as the land she lived on. Her hands, though small, were strong, used to the feel of rough wood and the pull of stubborn weeds. She lived alone, a widow on the frontier, with only the wind and the vast sky for company. Her husband had left her with this claim, a patch of land marked by simple wooden posts at its corners. Each post was a quiet promise, a declaration of ownership in a world that often seemed to belong to no one. Around her small garden patch, a line of barbed wire gleamed dully in the sun. It wasn't much, but it kept the few stray cattle from nibbling her precious greens. Life out here was a daily test of will. The sun beat down with relentless heat, turning the soil to powder. Every morning, Alera would step out of her sod house, her boots crunching on the dry ground. She'd scan the horizon, her eyes shaded by a worn bonnet. The air tasted of dust, a fine grit that settled on everything, even her lips. The only sound was the wind, sometimes a soft sigh, other times a roaring beast. She had built a small windbreak of piled stones and tough native bushes to protect her chickens. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. This land demanded hard work and patience. It didn't give up its bounty easily. But Alera, with her quiet strength, was ready for the challenge. She had chosen this life, and she would make it bloom, even in the harshest conditions. She knew the dry land held secrets, and she was determined to find them. And begin. Beyond the small fence garden, hidden from the casual glance of a passerby, Alera began her secret work. It started with a dream, a tiny seed of hope in the vast, dry expanse. She wanted an orchard. Not just any orchard, but one filled with apple trees, their branches heavy with sweet, red fruit. It was a crazy idea, everyone said. Apples didn't grow on the frontier. The land was too dry, the sun too fierce. But Alera had a different kind of stubbornness. She began by digging, not just a shallow hole, but deep, deep into the earth, searching for water. Her hands blistered, then hardened. The pickaxe bit into the dry soil, sending up clouds of fine dust that clung to her eyelashes. Each day, she would work until the sun dipped below the horizon, her back aching, her muscles burning. She dug 2 wells, one after the other, until she found enough water to make her dream possible. It wasn't much, just a slow seep, but it was enough. Next came the saplings. She had ordered them from a faraway place, tiny sticks with even tinier roots, wrapped carefully in damp cloth. She planted them with reverence, spacing them out in neat rows behind her sod house. They looked so small, so fragile against the vastness of the prairie. Each morning, before the sun grew too hot, Alera would carry buckets of water from her hand-dug wells. She would carefully pour a little around the base of each sapling, watching the thirsty earth drink it up. She touched the young trees every day. Their bark was smooth at first, then slowly grew rougher as they aged. She felt the sticky sap on her fingers when a branch broke, a sweet, earthy smell. She talked to them, too, whispering encouragement, telling them to grow strong. She built small mounds of earth around their bases to hold the precious water. She even put up tiny, makeshift windbreaks of old burlap sacks to shield them from the harshest gusts. It was slow, hard work, a labor of love and quiet determination. No one knew about her secret garden, her hidden hope. And begin. As Alera tended her growing trees, memories often drifted through her mind, like dust motes in a sunbeam. She thought of past seasons, some even harder than the present. There were years when the dust wasn't just on her lips, but in the very air, so thick it made the sun a dull, orange ball. The wind howled then, not a whisper, but a shriek that rattled the windows of her sod house. Those were the times when people suffer the most. Many folks tried to cross the frontier in those days. They were looking for a new life, just like she had. But the land was cruel to the unprepared. Wagons broke down, animals died, and hope faded under the relentless sun. Alara, despite her own struggles, couldn't turn a blind eye. Her small sod house, though humble, became a beacon for those lost and tired. She remembered the young family from Ohio, their faces streaked with tears and dust, their baby coughing from the dry air. Alara had shared her meager stores, a handful of dried beans, a small piece of salted meat, and precious water from her cistern. She let them sleep on the floor of her home, safe from the cold desert night. The warmth of her hearth, even if fueled by scarce cow chips, was a comfort they hadn't known in weeks. There was the old man, his eyes clouded with despair, whose wagon had lost a wheel miles away. Alara had given him tools and shared her last loaf of bread. He stayed for 2 days, mending his wagon, and left with a grateful nod that spoke louder than any words. She never asked for anything in return. It was simply what one did on the frontier. You helped your neighbor, even if you'd never seen them before and might never see them again. These acts of quiet kindness were not planned. They simply happened, driven by a deep sense of shared humanity. She never expected anything back. Her orchard was her secret joy, her gift to herself. Her kindness to strangers was her gift to the world, a simple act of mercy in a harsh land. She had no way of knowing how these threads of memory, woven into the fabric of her life, would one day become her salvation. And begin. Years melted into one another, marked by the changing height of Alara's apple trees. The small saplings she had planted with such hope were no longer mere sticks. They had grown, slowly but surely, their branches reaching skyward, their leaves of vibrant green. Alara continued her daily ritual of watering, her hands now knowing the exact feel of each tree's bark, the subtle differences in their growth. The sticky sap, once just a scent, was now a familiar part of her gardening hands. Then came the terrible dry spell. It wasn't just a harsh season. It was as if the sky had forgotten how to cry. Day after day, the sun blazed down, merciless and unyielding. The air shimmered with heat, and the wind, instead of bringing relief, felt like a hot breath from an oven. The land cracked and crumbled, turning into a vast, dusty desert. The small creeks that usually ran through the territory dried up, leaving only beds of parched mud. The crops, what little there were, withered and died. The corn stalks stood like skeletal figures, their leaves brown and brittle. Cattle, once fat and healthy, grew thin, their ribs showing through their hide. People began to go hungry. Their faces grew hollow, their eyes worried. The laughter that once echoed across the plains was replaced by a quiet, desperate silence. Wagons, once heading west with hope, were now turning back, their occupants defeated. But behind Alara's sod house, a miracle was unfolding. Her apple trees, though not yet giants, stood firm. Their leaves, a deep, healthy green, seemed to mock the surrounding desolation. And on their branches, tiny, hopeful green apples began to form. Then they swelled, growing round and red, catching the sunlight like jewels. Alara still carried water from her deep wells, but now, instead of just sustaining growth, her efforts were bringing forth fruit. The sight of the lush, thriving orchard against the backdrop of the dying land was startling, a testament to her quiet defiance and years of hidden labor. It was a secret, vibrant heart beating in the chest of a dying world. And begin. News, even in the vastness of the frontier, had a way of traveling. Sometimes it was a whisper carried on the wind, sometimes a shouted warning from a passing wagon. The news of the great dry spell, the starvation sweeping the territory, reached far and wide. It reached the ears of those who had once been lost and found a moment of peace and kindness in Alara's humble home. They were no longer the desperate, tired travelers Alara had known. Years had passed, and the frontier had either broken them or made them stronger. Many had found their own claims, built their own homes, and faced their own battles with the land. They had learned to work hard, to dig deep, to endure. They had become skilled with axes, wise in the ways of wells, and strong of back. They were the kind of people who didn't forget a kindness, especially one offered when they had nothing. One evening, around a flickering campfire many miles away, a grizzled prospector named Jebediah heard talk of the drought. He listened to the grim stories of withered crops and empty bellies. Then someone mentioned the little sod house by the dry creek bed, and how even there, things were bad. Jebediah's eyes, usually sharp with the glint of gold fever, softened. He remembered the young woman who had shared her last cup of coffee with him when his mule had broken its leg. He remembered her quiet strength. Miles away, a young mother, now with 2 sturdy children by her side, heard the same news. She was the woman from Ohio, whose baby had coughed from the dust. She remembered the warm corner of Alara's sod house, the taste of real bread after weeks of hardtack. She had named her youngest daughter Alara, a silent promise of gratitude. Word spread from one to another, a quiet current of memory flowing through the parched land. They remembered the small acts of generosity, the unexpected refuge. They remembered the woman who asked for nothing in return. And now, as the land suffered, their thoughts turned to her. They knew she was alone, and they knew she was kind. They also knew that kindness, especially on the frontier, was a debt that could only be repaid with action. A silent understanding began to form among them, a common purpose. And begin. One dusty morning, as Alara was checking her apple trees, she heard a sound she hadn't heard in years, the creak of wagon wheels. Then another and another. Her heart, usually steady, fluttered with a mix of surprise and a little fear. Who would be coming to her isolated claim now, in the middle of such a drought? Soon, a small procession appeared on the horizon. Dust plumed behind them like smoke signals. As they drew closer, Alara could make out figures on horseback and in wagons. They weren't strangers. Their faces, though older and weathered by the sun, were familiar. There was Jebediah, his beard now streaked with white, leading the first wagon. Behind him, the young mother from Ohio, her children now teenagers, waved shyly. And with them were others, faces Alara dimly recognized from years past. A trapper she'd once given flour to, a family whose sick child she'd nursed. They pulled their wagons to a halt near her sod house. Their wagons weren't empty. They were laden with big, rough-hewn water barrels, filled to the brim. Axes glinted in the morning sun, strapped to the sides of the wagons. And the people themselves, men and women, looked strong and ready for work, their arms muscled from years of frontier life. "Alara," Jebediah called out, his voice raspy but kind. "We heard tell of the dry times, and we remembered." Alara, surprised, simply nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected anything. Then, one of the younger men, a son of the Ohio family, walked past the side of her sod house. He stopped dead. His eyes, wide with disbelief, stared at what lay beyond. "Look," he shouted, his voice full of wonder. "Look at this." The others followed his gaze. There, stretching out behind Alara's humble home, was the orchard, a patch of vibrant green in a world of brown. The apple trees, heavy with ripe, red fruit, stood tall and proud. They were a shocking sight, a miracle in the parched land. The air around them felt cooler, cleaner, smelling faintly of sweet apples and damp earth. "An orchard," whispered the young mother, tears welling in her eyes. "In this desert." They saw the hand-dug wells, the careful windbreaks, the years of quiet labor. They saw not just trees, but Alara's unwavering hope, her secret defiance of the harsh land. And in that moment, they understood. They weren't just here to help a kind woman. They were here to save a living testament to persistence, a source of life that could, perhaps, save them all. And begin. There was no need for long speeches or explanations. The sight of the lush green orchard in the midst of the baked earth was enough. A silent understanding passed among the group. They had come to help, and now they knew exactly how. The work began at once, a flurry of purposeful activity that filled the air with new sounds. Axes swung with strong, rhythmic thuds, felling nearby scrub and dead wood that could be used for shade. the dry air filled with the sharp scent of cut timber and the grunts of effort. Men and women moved with practiced ease, their movements quick and sure. The water barrels, so precious, were unloaded and positioned. A human chain formed, stretching from Alara's deep hand-dug wells to the thirsty roots of the apple trees. Buckets clanged as they were filled and passed from hand to hand, each drop a lifeline. The young mother, who had been a scared girl years ago, now worked tirelessly, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, her movements precise as she poured water at the base of each tree. The cool, wet earth around the roots was a small comfort in the relentless heat. They built higher windbreaks from branches and old canvas, creating more shade for the precious grove. They dug small trenches to direct any precious runoff directly to the trees. They worked from dawn until dusk, their clothes caked with dust, the fine grit settling on their lips, making them feel perpetually dry. But they didn't stop. They remembered Alara's quiet acts of kindness, the shelter she'd offered, the food she'd shared when they had nothing. This was their way of saying thank you, a shared burden that felt light because it was born of gratitude. Alara worked alongside them, her heart full. She showed them the quirks of her wells, the spots where the water was deepest, the trees that needed extra care. She felt the rough bark of her trees under her hands, but now there were other hands too, strong and willing, sharing the work. The orchard, once her secret, was now a shared hope, nurtured by many hands, bound by a shared history of kindness given and received. Begin. The combined effort worked wonders. The orchard, once Alara's solitary triumph, now belonged to everyone. Its green canopy, protected by newfound shade and fed by constant streams of water, continued to thrive. The red apples, plump and juicy, became more than just fruit. They became symbols of survival, of hope, and of the power of working together. Soon, word spread beyond Alara's claim. News of the thriving orchard, a verdant oasis in the middle of the desolation, drew people from miles around. Not just the hungry, but those who sought to understand how such a miracle had come to be. They came to Alara's farm, saw the bounty, and heard the stories of how this quiet woman had nurtured her trees and, in doing so, had nurtured the seeds of community. The apples provided much-needed food. They were eaten fresh, their crisp sweetness a balm to parched throats. They were dried for storage, ensuring sustenance for the lean months ahead. The seeds were carefully saved, promising future growth. Alara, with the help of her new community, even started teaching others how to care for young trees, how to find water, and how to protect their own small patches of green. What had started as Alara's quiet kindness, her simple acts of feeding and sheltering strangers, had blossomed into something far greater than she could have imagined. The migrants she had helped, now strong and capable, became the backbone of a new way of life. They saw the value in collective effort, in shared resources, and in the deep roots of gratitude. The town, once a collection of struggling homesteads, began to transform. Inspired by Alara's orchard, people started digging deeper wells, planting hardier crops, and sharing knowledge. They formed a cooperative, pooling their resources and their labor. Windbreaks appeared around other homes, and discussions turned to long-term planning, not just day-to-day survival. Alara's foresight, her stubborn belief that life could thrive even in the harshest of conditions, had not only saved her orchard, but had sparked a quiet revolution. The community, once on the brink of starvation, now had food, and more importantly, hope. Her gentle spirit and years of selfless acts had woven a strong, unbreakable thread that bound them all together. The dusty frontier, still harsh, now held pockets of vibrant green, living proof that kindness, like a well-tended seed, would always find a way to grow and nourish all.